You're listening to The Collected Podcast, bringing you stories that remind us who God is and who we are in Him. The Collected Podcast is a production of Collected Ministries. Follow Collected on social media at Collected Podcast, and be sure to visit thecollectedpodcast.com for show notes and additional content related to today's episode.
Welcome to Season 5, Episode 12 of the Collected Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Biondo, and this week I'm bringing you a conversation with Chayil Johnson. He is the executive chef at Community Matters Cafe here in Uptown, and that is just an incredible ministry, and he'll tell you all about that, I'm sure. So Chayil, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank y'all for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. And as we get started, I was wondering if you could share a little bit about how you came to know the Lord and how you ended up doing what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I kind of feel like I had the very boring standard, growth within my faith. I didn't have that, big revival story or anything, but, grew up originally from New Orleans, grew up in a really big family. I'm one of six. From two loving parents, and we were raised in a Christian household, taught all of the principles, what it was, and the big thing that we had was we were homeschooled. So my parents had a lot of time and ability to really pour into us. The best way that they felt was to teach us our understanding of the gospel and the word, and our personal relationship with God and Jesus. And we were able to hone in on that. Grew up just very religiously structured. So I probably read the Bible a couple of times by the time I was 14 or 15.
Yes.
All the way through. Was big into theology, and I'm still very big into theology, but very strongly studied it throughout middle school, throughout high school. The curriculum that we did was Christian based, so just a lot of theological foundation in that. And so, that structure and foundation was always there, just from my upbringing. And I would say probably getting into college, it was the first time I moved away from home. I was I'm number 3 out of the children, so kind of the middle child. And I was the first and only child to move out of state for school. I moved up here to Charlotte, North Carolina, studied culinary arts at Johnson & Wales. And I would say that was probably the time where the relationship really felt real with me, my relationship with Jesus, because it was I was out of my general comfort zone of what it was. I didn't have my parents immediately there to, obviously we can always call, but to ask questions or to really overview me from decisions and ways of thinking. And it was all very much right there in front of me to make decisions. And so I guess kind of just seeing that really put me in a place of, forcing myself to be in a personal and strong relationship with the Lord, and, having to make hard decisions of, well, is this what God wants me to be doing right now? Is this, do I feel like I'm moving in this direction? And my professional career kind of started off at a very young age. In terms of, making decisions about my professional career, because I started culinary school when I was 12.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I guess that's the beauty of homeschooling.
It is.
Yeah.
A lot to be able to do a lot of extracurriculars. The school I went to was a very, very professional level of study within all the arts. It's called NOCA in New Orleans. And you can go for a bunch of different arts: media, dance, drama, and acting, set design, creative writing, film, all those things. A lot of the most famous artists from New Orleans went through this high school, like John Batiste, Harry Connick Jr., the Marsalis family, Anthony Mackie. So I went for culinary, and they did the Johnson Wales curriculum because the arts program was created by Emeril Lagasse.
Wow.
I had what would have been a bachelor's in culinary arts by the time I got to my junior year of high school.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
It's pretty cool, but that really just set the tone for my professional development. So by the time I got to college, I did a lot of fast track programming. So I got my bachelor's degree in about 2.5 to 3 years. So I was very much on the track of like, all right, so what's the next move? And since it wasn't a standard practice or flow of, of that life, it was, all right, I've done all this already. So now what am I supposed to do? I find myself having to trust in God of, all right, am I making the right decision here? Is this what you want? Is this your vision that you have for me? And just that kind of pressure in itself just kind of forced me in a position to, be more intentional about my relationship with God. So I'll say around like 2021 is where I was like, took my faith on a non-just, okay, this is like what my family does and this is what I just grew up doing, but this is something that's actually real and makes a difference in my life and it makes a difference in the life of others around me.
Yeah. Well, and discovering something you're so passionate about and that is now your career at such a young age, along the way, did you ever like question this path that you're on? Or was it always like, this is it, this is what I'm doing?
Maybe a little bit. When I say early on, I mean really early on. So maybe like 14 or 15. I was like, oh man, do I really want to be like cooking professionally? Because I did other stuff. So I was a pretty good baseball player. But I, had a slew of injuries over like a 3-year span, and I was doing cooking at the same time too. And so I wanted to really focus on one because, I was playing at a decent level. So if I wanted to jump to the next level of maybe looking at it for college, I needed to focus a lot of time and energy on it.
Yeah.
And I broke my thumb my freshman year, and then my sophomore year, I got cartilage damage in my wrist. And to rehab that and then get back up to speed on that skill level would have taken a whole lot of time.
Yeah.
And so I focused on culinary. And I remember the point where I wondered, like the exact point when I wondered, is this something I actually like want to do? Or is there something else for me? There is a documentary called, I think I might get the first name wrong, but I think it's Hero Dreams of Sushi. Okay. It is a documentary about a master Japanese sushi chef in Japan who runs a 3 Michelin star restaurant that's literally just like a little room. And I think he fits like 10 people at a time. And he's considered the greatest sushi chef in the world. And he's like this 89-year-old man. And his whole life is just centered around the mastery of sushi, from what he eats himself, where he grows, where the rice is grown, where the fish is caught, what the fish are eating, what time he cuts the fish, what's the temperature in the room when he cuts the fish, all these things. He's the only one who's allowed to touch the fish. His son, who's been his apprentice, I think he said for like 50 or 60 years, his son won't be allowed to do what he does till he dies. Like that's the only way he'll be allowed to do it. And like, that's how long the apprenticeship is until the master dies.
Wow.
And so I'm very dedicated to what I do, and I'm very meticulous about what I do. I get hyper focused on things. So I took culinary so seriously. I still take it very seriously. When I was young, I took it. It was everything to me. So when I saw that documentary, I looked at that. I'm like, man, I don't think I have that level of focus or that level of desire to make it all of my life all about that.
Yeah.
And so it made me question, do I love culinary that much? Do I love anything that much? I remember feeling almost depressed at 15 years old, watching this documentary in my school. My teacher was showing the documentary to us in the school. And I'm like, man, I don't know if I love anything that much. And so I remember I took probably 2 or 3 weeks where every single day I would take potatoes and onions from school and I would practice my knife cuts every single day straight for 2 or 3 weeks, probably an hour every single day, to see if like I had the drive there to do it. And I did, and I was able to do it. And so I probably for 3 to 4 days a week, most weeks throughout the year between age of 13 to sophomore year of college, I would practice my knife cuts on potatoes and onions.
Wow.
To master the little things of consistency, knife cuts, measurements, and stuff like that. And then after a while, I came to realization, like, I don't need to be at this level of dedication and love of something to, like, I mean, this, like I said, this man's entirety of his life was just about the mastery of making sushi. Nothing else almost really mattered. Like, if you look at the way he's talking to his son, it was like his son was nothing more than an apprentice. I'm sure he loved his son, but his son was an apprentice to him. His son wasn't like his job wasn't to make his son a good man or to make sure his son knew how to raise his children. His job was, I want to make my son a master at making sushi too.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I don't need to be at that level to love what I'm doing. And I also don't need to follow the standard practice of the culinary industry of, working in fine dining and being a line cook or a commis for so many years before I become a demi chef, before I then become a sous chef, and then a chef de cuisine, and then a CDC, and then executive chef. And I'm 40, 50 years old, and I'm finally become an executive chef for something. Like, it took me a couple of years to realize that didn't have to be everybody's route to be a master or dedicated to their craft of what they were doing. But at 15, that was the one time where I'm like, man, do I really want to do I want it that bad?
Yeah. Wow. And just your dedication to that, I feel like is so inspiring for anybody listening who, even if they're not trying to be a chef, which I'd imagine most of our listeners aren't, but it applies to this idea of like, God is so creative and he's given each of us these unique gifts and passions that we can use to serve him. But sometimes it requires this level of dedication. And we're in this place of like, Lord, is this right? Is this the path you have for me? Do I want to give what I know would be required to do this with excellence?
Yeah.
And I think there's somebody out there who is asking that question, like they feel like God is requiring something of them that feels hard, that feels beyond maybe what they have on their own that they can give. So what encouragement might you have for somebody who's in that place of just wrestling with like, God, you're asking so much of me and I don't know if I can do it?
This is the moments where you have to have faith. I think we look at it. I find it so funny. I remind myself this a lot of the time. I remind a lot of my employees and the students that I work with a lot of the time that, don't ask God for something if you're not prepared to deal with the things that it takes to get it. So if you pray to God for patience, God's not just it's not a like where God's talking to Solomon in a dream and he just grants you with something.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask God for patience, God's probably going to send people or things in your life that'll test your patience to grow. If you ask for more faith, God will give you things to help strengthen your faith. Things that strengthen your faith are things that causes doubt and makes you be faithful. If you pray to God for, and this isn't always how it works, but, if you may pray for God for more mental stability or for that better job that you really like, or, hey, God, or something as like, hey, God, I want to be able to run a mile, right? There's work and effort, faith. The word says faith isn't just by works alone. And I think people skip over the part where it says works alone. There is work that still goes into it.
Yeah.
It's not all one-sided. I think God is the blessing of, the blessing of God and Jesus is that they carry a lot of that burden that we would have to otherwise. But there is a level of, okay, now us as a people need to make the decision. Do we want to make this change in our life? Do we want to grow in this? Do we want what we're even asking for? Are we in a place of preparation of what we're asking for?
Yeah.
So, one of my parents instilled us a lot of principles that we follow by. A couple of them, one of them is practice makes permanent, not perfect. Because if you practice doing something the wrong way multiple times, you're not going to do it perfectly. You're going to do it the wrong way because that's what you practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Words matter. Death and life is in the power of the tongue. Speaking, God is so intentional about the words that he speaks and the power of words. So speak love, speak life, not just into others, but also into yourself. So positive reinforcement, but also honesty. I'm not going to lie to myself. So I don't have to be like, I wasn't great. I wasn't this savant when I started cooking at 12. Like it was, in New Orleans, like I grew up with a lot of people that were really, really talented and a lot better than me. When I started school, there's a lot of kids that were already working in restaurants at 13, 14, 15 years old. Some of their parents owned restaurants, which wasn't uncommon at all. And I came in, just because I was interested. So I had no prior culinary knowledge for real. So I had to, really ask myself, am I willing to work as hard as it takes to get to this level that I want to, or am I just going to kind of look around at the people around me and be like, oh, no, I'm not as good as them. And that just is what it is. But being able to, not give the negative self-talk of, oh, I'm not as good as them, I'll never be as good as them. But positive reinforcement would be, I'm not as good as them yet. What can I now do to make myself as good as them or make myself the best of what I can be? Because I'm in the mentality of you're only in competition with yourself every day to make yourself better than you were yesterday at something. And so you don't need to, you don't need to look at anybody else's paper or what everybody else is doing. God's vision of your greatness isn't always what everybody else's is. So me doing really good at what I'm doing may not be Gordon Ramsay or Emeril Lagasse or John McCusker or Jose Andres or any of these guys who we consider some of the best chefs in the world, right? If I'm comparing myself to them, there's a chance I may never get to that level, and then I should be okay with that.
Yeah.
But what is the plan that God has for me, and what am I doing to get to that place? And part of it is just discovering what that plan is God has for you, following in line of what it takes to get there, and then staying successful. Again, success in his eyes, not the world's eyes or man's eyes, but staying successful once you get to that point. And then the most important part in my eyes is then what are you doing to help people that were behind you to make their journey easier, or not necessarily easier, but more attainable, more accessible that may have not been there before.
That is so good. And listeners, all those tips will be typed up in the show notes. So you can refer back to the blog to access all of that again if you're driving and weren't able to take notes on all of that, because that's so good and so applicable to whatever challenge you're facing or whatever passion you're trying to pursue. And I feel like there's someone out there that needs to hear that through Christ, you can do harder things than you're giving yourself credit for. Yeah. And sometimes we sell ourselves short because we just don't think we're capable, and we don't believe that God will work through us. And maybe the root of it is we really don't believe that God is fully capable.
Yeah.
Yet I want someone out there to hear God is more capable than we can ever imagine. And he is so good to use us in his plan when we're open to it and willing to go down a hard path with him sometimes. Sorry, I got really fired up.
No,
yes,
absolutely.
Yes, Kyle, preach. So you now work at Community Matters, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what that is and how you ended up there, and just what because now it's also not just a job, but I'd imagine more of a ministry as well. So if you can tell us a little about Community Matters Cafe.
Absolutely. So Community Matters Cafe is a extension of the Charlotte Rescue Mission, which is a nonprofit organization that works with men and women in Charlotte who are going through substance abuse and addiction. So it is a all-encompassing recovery program for men and women to become physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually right with their sobriety, because it takes away all of those things addiction does. Yeah. So it's a 6-month program that houses and works with people throughout for their sobriety. It gets them connection with mental and physical health and recovery, gives them therapy, gives them counselors, physical health people to get them back right for those 6 months. And then after they finish that 6-month program, what it was is they would graduate. There was a couple of aftercare programs where if they wanted to go back to school or go directly back into work, it could kind of funnel them in through that. And so this company's we just celebrated they're going to get mad at me if I say this wrong, 85th. We just celebrated our 85th year of Charlotte Rescue Mission being open.
Wow.
And so after so long, because at first it just started as a homeless shelter. And then in the 80s and 90s, they realized that the root of a lot of the homelessness was addiction. So that's when it turned from a homeless shelter to a sobriety clinic. And so in 2017, they discovered the higher percentage of people not maintaining their sobriety after leaving the program. And they discovered that a lot of it was rooted into there was not really a segue or smooth transition for the students after they finish. 6 months isn't a long time for your initial sobriety. The majority of the residents that go through the program, this is their first time being clean in their life. And the youngest age we allow into the program is 18, and then there's no limit to the age after that. But the average age of most of our men and women who were first exposed to hard drugs or alcohol was about 11 or 12. They became consistent users by the time they were 13, and the average age of them being full-on addicts is about 14 and 15 years old. So if you have someone who's in their 40s or 50s, this might be the first 6 months, the longest that they've been clean since they were literally children.
Wow.
So as you can imagine, 6 months in retrospect is both a long time and not a long time at all. So after that transitional program after that time of being, literally surrounded only by people who are in sobriety and only by people that are actively trying to help you with your sobriety, and then just being thrown into what we call the real world, and where everyone else around you really doesn't care too much about your sobriety. It's just like, we need you to be functioning members of society and work and, do this and don't get in trouble. And they've only known one thing for the majority of their life. That's a very hard ask. A lot of them have no idea how to function in this world without the use of drugs or alcohol.
Yeah.
And so with that, they want to come up with a transitional program to better help and better prepare the students for that. So they came with the idea of the Community Matters Cafe. So in 2018, they broke ground on the same plot of land as the Charlotte Rescue Mission, where the men's shelter is, on West First and Cedar Street, right behind the Panther Stadium. So it is a full-service cafe and restaurant that is attached with a life skills program. So the men and women, after they do their 6 months of rehabilitation, they have the choice of joining our life skills program, where they relearn life skills, which we would call like proper communication, learning to manage your stress, better equipping to handle confrontation or negative thoughts and emotions, working with people that you may not like, conflict resolution, all of these little day-to-day things that we go about and function with that might cause somebody who's going through recovery to slip up or resort back to drugs or alcohol. So this is a classroom setting of classes that we teach with these students for those 6 months, because the life skills program will be an additional 6 months. While they're also doing that, they're actively working in our cafe program. So full service cafe and restaurant. And for those 6 months, each student will rotate into every single different department that we have. So barista, server, busser, host, dishwasher, line cook, prep cook, pastry assistant. And what makes it different is each manager or staff member is kind of working as an educator towards them. So we're training them in these different departments of how to do the actual job and task at a high level. But at the same time, we take the time and effort for when it's a restaurant, there's stress everywhere. There's an inevitable conflict that's going to happen, whether it's another staff member, another student, a guest. It may be the student fault, it may be a guest fault. It doesn't matter. Stuff's always going to happen. And so what we do is we take this time to reutilize those life skills and to bring them back in to the equation of their life. So it's not like, oh, this happened, boom, you're done. It's, okay, let's pause what's going on. Let's walk through this. What's making you stressed out? Why did you react the way that you react? Let's go back into our steps, right? Could we have done this differently? So really focusing on their growth, their mental, spiritual, and emotional health, and seeing where these issues may lie and showing them the areas of where they can grow, and just kind of using like our professional skills and gifts within culinary and hospitality to do that, even though this thing's transition into deeper than just working within hospitality. So they do that for 6 months. While they do that, they get certification like Serve Safe, other testing within hospitality that helps qualify them for things. We're taking care of their room and board, so we're housing them. We're giving them weekly stipends. We're helping take care of medical and legal issues that they may be in. And and bus fare while also just helping them grow in these areas for those 6 months. After those 6 months, we help them find aftercare living, whether it's, sobriety living, where it's basically in a regular apartment, except everyone in this apartment complex is also sober and going through sobriety. We help them if they want to go back to school. We have another school program that helps them transition into either full university or community college. We have other work programs. We want to transition them into that. And then before that, we help them with like job interviewing and training and things of that sort. So we really just try to fully equip these men and women to enter society in a healthy way where they feel prepared, where they're not going with fear or panic of the unknown of what am I to expect now? I haven't been normal for so much amount of time, to prove to them and show them that they have the full capabilities of living in this world in sobriety and in our namesake, knowing that there's always a community backing them up and supporting them.
Wow. And if you are in the Charlotte area, you have to check this place out. It's so cute inside too. Like, it's an amazing space, such a good ambiance. The food is fantastic. I've been there many times. So I guess we have you to thank for that. Yeah. So if you are in Charlotte or passing through Charlotte, you have to stop. It's so wonderful. It's a great spot. So as you've been doing this and walking alongside of people, on their road to recovery and, seeing people maybe walking through some of the hardest struggles of their life. And I'm just wondering, like, what characters of God have you seen as he's also fighting for these people? And I don't know if that question makes sense, but like, as you've been working in this role and seeing God transforming people's lives through Community Matters and through the program and through the Charlotte Rescue Mission and just through his grace, what have you learned about his character?
I would say, so it's funny. So I'm a huge fan of biblical stories. I think biblical stories are kind of overlooked sometimes in the actual quality of the stories that they are. So I like to draw parallels a lot into my experiences and then what I've read in the Bible. So one thing that I've kind of two characters in the Bible that I've kind of drawn as inspiration into my daily walk and like what this season of my life has brought is King David and Esther. So for King David, it's that no matter what came up, it showed even in little tasks how God prepared him for the bigger moment of things. Yeah. So, David didn't know God was preparing him to be king, but David was, herding sheep at like 10 years old. David didn't know God was preparing him to fight battles against giants, and military is much bigger than him, but David was killing lions and bears as a 13-year-old. Yeah. And on top of that, we see David in all of his glory, and God said, I'm a man after you're a man after my own heart. Like, one of the highest praised men you could find in the Bible. And David messed up a lot. David, was a murderer. David stole a man's wife. David questionably wasn't a great father. His children did a lot of messed up things. Yeah. But amidst all that, David still had forgiveness. He still had redemption. And there was never a point where God turned his head towards David. There was repercussions for his sins. There was justice to the negative things and the bad things that David made decisions to do. But God never turned his face towards David, even in the moments where David turned his face towards God. So I look at that in both my walk and the walk with the students, because, a lot of our students weren't always good people, right? They didn't always make good decisions. And that's all people, right? Yeah. We go through seasons and changes of life. And a lot of them feel like they're not deserving of this second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th chance that they've been given. But to be able to watch them grow in a relatively short amount of time from these, huge areas of disparity from like, I was once here, we had one student, one of our current students I was talking to, who was telling me just how happy he was to be here because he said a year ago he was sleeping in a trash can.
Wow.
And now, like he says, and he's talked to his daughter for the first time in years, like she was willing to have a relationship with him. And, you know, that he has a stable job and he's enjoying life, right? He says he never would have thought he would have made it to this point from the decisions that he's made in his past. And then me personally, I really have probably my favorite biblical story is the story of Esther, which I like. I wish people understood how awesome just Esther was as a person and how strong of a character that she was. Like, you know, I think when we look at David, we look at Samson, Elijah is like, you know, John the Baptist is like, you know, these, you know, strong characters and warriors and this and that. Like, David was one poor girl, an orphan, who literally was holding, you know, the safety of the entire nation of Israel in her hand. And
I love Esther.
Right?
Yeah, she's one of my favorites. One of my favorite Bible characters.
She never shied away from the moment because she did two things. She listened and she never reacted out of fear. So I always try to draw that into my life. Am I listening to, like, she always listened to her uncle, or I guess really her cousin, and like listened to his sage advice, was prepared for the moment, never reacted, you know, out of fear. One of the principles that my parents taught me was in moments of stress, fear, or anxiety, you will not do what you want to do. You'll do what you know how to do.
Ooh.
So, because generally you just react in moments of fear, stress, or anxiety, right? So if I use this example, so I've never been in a fight before. If suddenly the situation comes up for me to fight, I'm not going to turn to Bruce Lee. I'm going to do what I know how to do, which is A, run, or B, get beat up.
Or start chopping potatoes.
Or chop potatoes. And it goes back to the other principle of practice makes permanent, right? Like Esther practiced a lot of those things. She practiced on listening and being obedient. She was knowledgeable, you know, when the king's men took her and they put all the women through the training processes and stuff. It was basically school. She was a top student in her knowledge of history and reading and art, and politics. And that showed in those moments. She knew how to, you know, expose, what was his name?
Haman. Yeah.
Haman. She knew how to expose Haman. She knew, you know, the right ways of like how to talk to the king. She knew when to take risks, right? So she was like perfect in strategy. She wasn't just like some weak young woman who was a pretty face and got away with, you know, because of that, because like Mordecai told her this and she's like, oh yeah, no, she was very smart. She was intentional. She was strategic. And she made decisions, even possibly at her own, against her own safety.
Yeah.
For the betterment of her people and the greater for people around her, and see how that worked out for her. That literally like one of the starts of a line going to Christ. And I try to run that parallel through my life, especially within the cafe of, you know, being humble. Like, am I listening to what's going on around me, both positive and negative? And how am I reacting to those things? Like, am I just running through life aimlessly right now? Or am I being intentional in decisions that I'm making, in what I'm doing, how that affects people, especially when it comes to this, because how I talk to somebody, you know, everybody has to make their own decision, but how I talk to somebody at my cafe can be a deciding factor of their sobriety sometimes, which goes into their livelihood. Yeah. So if I'm coming in because I'm angry or upset about something and I decide to take that out on one of my students because they frustrated me, then that's, you know, I'm conscious. I'm now making a decision that's affecting somebody else's life because I decide to think of myself in that moment. So I like to draw into that and just, you know, use that as kind of motivation each day too, that I'm always doing something for a bigger picture. Like Esther, like I said, Esther didn't know that she was about to save all of the Jewish nation. Yeah. She didn't know that she was about to she was like the line, like her survival was going into the line of, lineage to Christ. She didn't know any of those things.
Yeah.
By the time she died, she didn't know those things.
Right. Yeah.
But things always fold into a bigger picture.
And God is always at work behind the scenes. One thing I learned about the book of Esther is it's the only book in the Bible that never actually says the name of God. And yet his fingerprints are all over it. But like no names of God are used. God is never mentioned.
Never knew that.
But I mean, he is behind the scenes on every little thing. And so sometimes in our lives, like we feel like, God, where are you? And he's just whispering, I'm here. I'm behind the scenes. I've got this. So we are almost out of time, but I want to ask you 2 more questions. One, what is a blue skies dream? Or what does that mean? And as we were emailing, you mentioned a blue skies dream for your life and career. What is that? What is that?
A blue skies dream is basically like a pipe dream, or like best case scenario, like, what would you want in life? Like, what would you want to happen? Like, nothing holding you back. What is your like perfect dream scenario of your life or your career, whatever it may be?
Yeah. Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So what is yours?
My blue skies dreams right now, because it's changed multiple times, is I want to eventually be able to, I want to open a school. Because the culinary school I went to just played such a huge effect in my life that I want to open a school, like a training center for young boys and girls who are either in impoverished areas or in neighborhoods where they wouldn't have the access otherwise to make like choices of their dreams or to see other goals that they might have. So I want to kind of create like similar to the cafe, like a life skills training center for young boys and girls. Specific towards culinary, that's what I'm thinking right now, because that's what my talent is in, to expose them to all of these different avenues of hospitality and culinary that they can enter into. Because I think a big problem that we have in a lot of areas, especially like poor neighborhoods, is a lack of access and exposure to opportunities that are out there for people.
Yeah.
What can you dream of if you don't know it's capable to be dreamt?
Right.
So, just like the different avenues of food that you have. I mean, you can not just be a chef, but you can be a food writer and a food blogger. You can be a food photographer. You can be a traveler, food media. There's a slew, a critic, whatever. There's so many things. I want to just be able to expose that and be able to grant that ability for young boys and girls to be able to have.
That is amazing. Well, I see you excelling at that and God just using you in powerful ways to change the lives of so many kids. So my last question is very vague, but what did I miss, or what final thoughts do you want to leave us with today? Maybe a final word of encouragement or challenge for our listeners.
Yeah, I would say, words of encouragement is even in the worst times or the worst days, when you are like waking up in the morning just dreading, always look back and think of the other worst days you've been through and realize that you survived that. God was with you every step of the way there. He hasn't left yet. Just because tough times are still there, he hasn't left. But try to find the joy in things. One way that I love looking at it is I'm a big fan of anime and cartoons. I'm a nerd at heart. And there's a production company called Studio Ghibli that produces like anime movies and shows and whatnot. But the focus of them is just everyday things. And just he makes them look beautiful. Like a whole show, you may just like be a mom, like cooking in her kitchen or gardening, and it's mundane, but it's like the colors are beautiful and, the sounds are just like, what's the word? I can't figure out the word it is, but just like artistically gratifying to see and hear.
Yeah.
And, people love, they're world renowned, but the biggest thing is like, you can live in a Studio Ghibli movie, just like love the everyday things that you're doing. Like wake up in the morning and just see the sunshine. That's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
You look for the small, beautiful things in life that's going on around you every single day, and find joy in those little things, and everything else just kind of starts to like draw together.
I love that. That's perfect. Thank you so much, Kyle.
You're very welcome. Thank y'all for having me.
What an amazing conversation with Kyle. I loved hearing the passion that he has for what the Lord has called him to, and just this creative outlet that he's also using for this incredible ministry to change people's lives in our city of Charlotte here. So again, like I said, if you're in Charlotte, go check out Community Matters Cafe. Delicious food, amazing workspace too. If you want to just go hang out there, get some work done, order some coffee and a snack, I highly recommend it. Toward the end there, Kyle mentioned Esther, and I just wanted to share a few other thoughts. I did the Beth Moore Esther study a few years back and then did it again. I mean, it's one of my favorites. And in there, she talks about how Esther did not fulfill her little girl dreams, but she did fulfill her God-given destiny, and how sometimes our lives can look so different from anything we ever expected, but none of it is a surprise to God, and He can use every part of your story for His plan and to accomplish His purpose. And at one point in the study, Beth says, you cannot amputate your history from your destiny, meaning that everything you've gone through, every hardship, every struggle can be used by God for the glory of His kingdom. And that is His redemption, that we can't become the person we're meant to be without every part of our story, even the bad parts. God can use those for His good and His glory, and for your good and for the saving of other people. So our stories aren't just for ourselves. They're to proclaim God's name and to draw others toward Him and to show them who He is and how we have overcome because of Him and through Him. The Lord will never leave us hanging, even when things seem confusing or dark or scary. The Lord is near, and He will use every part of your story to accomplish His plans for you and for His kingdom. So I hope that is a little bit of encouragement for you today. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Collected Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. And if you like what you've heard, we'd love it if you'd help spread the word. Check back here for new episodes dropping every other Thursday. You can follow along on social media at Collected Ministries.